Before diving into this incredible story, remember to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Here, every story has something to say, and you won't want to miss a single one. The evening had been planned for weeks. The billionaire's mansion shone like a palace beneath the thousands of lights from crystal chandeliers, every polished surface reflecting grandeur and power. The walls were adorned with antique paintings and rare sculptures, works of art that testified to exquisite taste and boundless wealth. The hand-picked guests were the most influential in the city: CEOs, politicians, celebrities, and international investors. All were dressed in their finest attire, eagerly anticipating the prestige and strategic conversations that a dinner of this caliber promised. Yet, a strange tension hung in the air, invisible but palpable. Quiet murmurs rippled through the room as guests took their seats, their gazes drifting toward the door as if anticipating a sensational appearance. But no one could have guessed what was about to happen. When the billionaire finally stood up to announce the start of the evening, a respectful silence fell. "Tonight, I've invited someone very special to my table." The guests exchanged quick glances, some eyebrows raised, others a hint of interest in their smiles. A celebrity, a politician, a business tycoon? No one could have imagined what would appear at the door. It was Clara, the chambermaid. Modest in her attire, but radiating dignity, she advanced calmly and confidently. The murmurs quickly turned into whispers and mocking smiles. Some thought it was a joke, others a strange whim of the billionaire. But the billionaire wasn't joking. He guided her to the place of honor, just to his right, in front of the entire assembly. His voice, clear and calm, resonated throughout the room. "Clara isn't just my employee. She accompanies me in my most important decisions. Tonight, I wanted you to see what I see every day." Clara sat calmly, her hands folded in her lap. She began to speak, and her words immediately captivated everyone's attention. She shared ideas, perspectives, and advice that even the most educated guests listened to with astonishment. Her wisdom, intelligence, and kindness felt like a breath of fresh air in the room filled with ego and pretension. Gradually, the stifled laughter and mocking smiles subsided, replaced by silent respect. The guests understood, in silence, that true greatness was not measured by wealth or status, but by a person's character, intelligence, and dignity. This dinner, which everyone thought would be a mere social event, turned into a memorable and powerful lesson, a moment when humility, gratitude, and respect prevailed over arrogance and hasty judgments. The manor's grand hall shone beneath crystal chandeliers. The parquet floor reflected the lights like a mirror, and the tables were set with meticulous care: immaculate white tablecloths, polished silver cutlery, and sparkling crystal glasses. Every detail exuded wealth and elegance. The guests arrived in limousines, dressed in their finest suits and evening gowns. Among them were CEOs, celebrities, and politicians, all ready for an evening of prestige and mutual flattery. They chatted amongst themselves, exchanging glances and measured smiles, each silently sizing up the others. As the clock struck 8 o'clock, the billionaire rose to greet his guests. The murmur in the room died away instantly. He smiled, then declared in a clear voice, "Tonight, I've invited someone very special to my table." The guests exchanged questioning glances. Some eyebrows were raised, others offered curious smiles. Everyone was expecting to see a celebrity or a VIP guest. At that moment, the door opened softly. A woman entered. Modest in her attire, but radiating dignity and composure, she stepped forward confidently. Clara, the billionaire's maid. The murmurs turned into incredulous whispers. "What? Is she serious? This is a joke, isn't it?" The billionaire gestured towards her and said, "Clara, take the place of honor, just to my right." Clara bowed slightly, a polite smile on her lips, and sat down. The entire room was frozen, oscillating between astonishment and silent mockery. One guest, unable to suppress a snicker, murmured, "He must be laughing at us." But the billionaire, unperturbed, simply replied, "Tonight, you will see what I see every day." As the meal began, Clara remained calm, observing the room with a slight smile. She knew this evening would shake more than one ego. What had started as a social dinner promised to become a memorable lesson. Dinner had barely begun when the murmurs started up again, even louder than before. The guests were stealing glances at Clara, whispering from behind their glasses. "It's impossible. She has no business being here. He's making fun of all of us, that's obvious." But Clara, sitting with an upright and elegant posture, showed no sign of embarrassment. On the contrary, she smiled slightly, as if she knew exactly the effect she was having on this crowd accustomed to judging too quickly. The billionaire, seated to his left, broke the silence. "Clara has a lot to share. She knows better than anyone the importance of integrity and honesty." A surprised silence fell over the table. Some guests exchanged incredulous glances, trying to hide their curiosity. Clara then spoke for the first time, her voice soft but confident. "Thank you for your welcome. I may not be an expert in business or politics, but I have learned to observe and understand people through my work. And sometimes, true intelligence lies hidden in simple gestures and everyday respect." The guests, initially mocking, began to listen attentively. Even the most skeptical were struck by the depth of her words. She recounted anecdotes about little-known employees, situations where kindness and patience had transformed conflicts into successes. Each example was precise, sincere, and incredibly relevant. A businesswoman at the other end of the table whispered to her neighbor, "I never would have thought she would have such a strong presence." Clara continued, with a mixture of humility and firmness. "It is not wealth that defines a person, but their ability to respect and understand others. Even those you consider inferior have lessons to offer you." A chill ran through the room. The guests realized that the laughter and hasty judgments they had exchanged earlier were not only inappropriate, but profoundly unfair. For the first time, this assembly of powerful and influential people began to perceive Clara's true worth, and a certain embarrassment could be seen on the faces of those who had doubted her. Dinner progressed, and the murmur of the guests had almost completely disappeared. Everyone listened to Clara with an attention that no celebrity or business expert had ever managed to capture at previous events. The billionaire raised his glass, attracting everyone's attention. "To those who know how to recognize greatness where it is found," he said with a smile, raising his glass towards Clara. A respectful silence fell. The guests exchanged glances, some blushing slightly with embarrassment. The earlier snickers had turned into genuine astonishment. Clara then spoke to explain some simple but impactful ideas. "In my work, I've learned that every gesture, even the smallest, has an impact. A kind word, a thoughtful gesture, can transform someone's day, and sometimes, change the course of events." She recounted an anecdote about a young intern whose efforts had been ignored for months, but who, encouraged by small gestures of support, had developed an idea that had enabled the billionaire's company to win a major contract. The guests, speechless, realized that she wasn't exaggerating. An investor sitting opposite murmured, I never would have thought that a chambermaid could understand so many things." Clara, with a humble smile, replied, "Experience does not depend on title or wealth. It depends on observation, attention, and respect." At that precise moment, most of the guests began to reconsider their prejudices. Those who had laughed or doubted before now felt uneasy. The surprise was complete. This woman, whom they had considered inferior, had just surpassed them in emotional intelligence and discernment. Seeing the change in their expressions, the billionaire nodded his head with satisfaction. This evening, which he had planned to teach a lesson in respect and humility, was beginning exactly as he had imagined. As the meal continued, Clara sensed the atmosphere changing. The guests, initially mocking, were now hanging on her every word. She had won their attention not through status or wealth, but through her clarity, wisdom, and humility. "I've observed many things over the years," Clara began, her voice soft but firm. "Even the most powerful among us have sometimes forgotten the importance of consideration and respect. The decisions you make, the words you speak, they leave invisible, but deep, marks." A heavy silence filled the room. The guests looked at each other, some lowering their eyes, aware that she was partly talking about them. Clara continued with specific examples, recounting stories of undervalued staff and small, everyday injustices that, if ignored, could cause considerable damage. She described how a seemingly insignificant remark, a gesture of arrogance, could destroy a person's trust and commitment. True leadership, she said, is not about the power you hold or the money you possess. It's about the ability to inspire, respect, and recognize the value of everyone. Even those you consider inferior have ideas and lessons to offer. A businesswoman, visibly uncomfortable, whispered to her neighbor. It's frightening to realize how right she is. The billionaire, observing the reactions, intervened. Clara reminds us of something many of us have forgotten. Humility and respect are not weaknesses, but strengths. Clara smiled slightly, without vanity, and added, arrogance and hasty judgment are easy. But true greatness lies in the ability to listen, learn, and value those around you. It was a moment of revelation for most of the guests. The laughter and murmurs of mockery had completely disappeared. Everyone now understood that this woman, humble and simple in the eyes of the world, was in reality the voice of wisdom in this room of power and pretension. As the dinner reached its climax, the billionaire stood up again, drawing everyone's attention. The murmurs ceased immediately, replaced by a curious silence. Tonight, he said, you saw Clara. She showed you that true greatness isn't measured by money or status. But now I'd like you to see something more personal. A discreet server then distributed a carefully sealed folder to each guest. Curious, each opened it. Inside were excerpts from emails, private messages, and even photos of past behavior, mockery, arrogant remarks, and unfair criticism of their employees or collaborators. Faces paled. The mocking smiles vanished. Some staggered, unable to hide their embarrassment. A famous actress murmured, "See, it's impossible, how?" The billionaire continued calmly. "What you see here reflects your own actions. Each of those moments you thought were insignificant has left its mark. Tonight, you are confronted with the reality of your behavior." Clara, still seated in the place of honor, calmly observed the scene. Her kind but firm gaze pierced the guests, accentuating their discomfort. An investor, his voice trembling, stammered, I didn't think that." But the billionaire cut in gently. "This is not a judgment on my part. It is a lesson. A lesson about humility, respect, and recognizing others." The murmurs resumed, but this time tinged with shame and reflection. Everyone understood that they had underestimated Clara, and that their arrogance had just been exposed for all to see. The tension in the room was palpable. For the first time, the guests realized that this evening was not just a social dinner, but a true mirror of their behavior, and that Clara, humble and intelligent, had unknowingly orchestrated a revolution in their minds. After the files were revealed, a heavy silence fell over the room. The guests averted their eyes, some nervously fiddling with their cutlery, others running their hands over their faces, unable to meet each other's gaze. The mockery and arrogance that had filled the room at the beginning of the evening had completely vanished. A few guests, overcome with guilt, tried to speak. A businesswoman stood up, her voice hesitant. "Clara. I'm sorry. I should never have judged your skills or your ideas." Clara gave him a sweet and welcoming smile. "Thank you. Acknowledging one's mistakes is already a big step." Another guest, a young CEO known for his arrogance, stammered, I wasn't aware of the impact of my words, and my actions." "Consciousness always comes with observation," Clara replied calmly, without animosity. Some guests, more reluctant, lowered their eyes, murmuring apologies in hushed voices. But Clara, with natural humility, accepted every word with grace, transforming this embarrassing moment into a true lesson in respect. The billionaire, observing the scene, smiled slightly. "What you are feeling now is important. This is not about punishment, but about becoming aware of your behavior and your responsibilities." The tension in the room gradually dissipated, replaced by a mixture of respect and reflection. The guests understood that true greatness lay not in wealth or status, but in the ability to listen, to learn, and to recognize the value of each individual, even those who had been underestimated. Clara, sitting with her straight posture and serene smile, had accomplished what no one would have thought possible, transforming a social dinner into a moment of reflection and profound awareness. As dinner drew to a close, an unusual calm settled over the room. The mocking murmurs had given way to more thoughtful discussions. The guests, impressed by Clara's lucidity, began to ask questions, timidly at first, then with greater sincerity. "Clara," ventured an investor, hesitantly, "how do you manage to understand people and their motivations so quickly?" "By observing carefully and listening without judging," she replied simply. "One learns more from actions than from titles or money." A politician, who had started the evening laughing discreetly, nodded his head seriously. "You make us think about how we treat our teams." Clara smiled humbly. "Many conflicts and failures could be avoided if we showed a little respect and consideration for others. Even the smallest gesture can have a huge impact." The billionaire, observing this transformation, intervened with a slight smile. "Some of you seem to be discovering a simple but essential truth: power without humility quickly becomes a burden, and wealth without respect is empty." The conversations became more open. Guests who had previously mocked or judged her began to share personal experiences and ask questions, seeking to understand and learn from Clara. The atmosphere changed completely. The room, once full of pretension and hasty judgments, was now filled with respect, humility, and genuine curiosity. A young CEO, visibly moved, whispered to his neighbor, "I never would have believed that a chambermaid could teach us a lesson that no one of our rank has ever taught us." Clara, without arrogance, nodded her head and replied, "Sometimes, you have to look where no one else is looking. That's where you find truth and wisdom." For the first time that evening, all the guests understood that this dinner was not just a social gathering, but a true awakening to the value of humility, listening, and respect. As dessert was served, the billionaire rose for the last time. Silence fell immediately in the room. Every gaze was fixed on him, some still uncertain, others deeply attentive. "Tonight, you saw Clara. You heard her words, observed her wisdom and felt the truth of her ideas. But there is still one last lesson," he said calmly, his gaze sweeping the room. A discreet waiter introduced a new element. On each table, a screen displayed video and written excerpts of the guests' past actions, moments when arrogance, contempt, or hasty judgments had been expressed toward their employees, colleagues, or partners. Faces froze, some paled, others lowered their eyes, unable to bear the truth laid bare. "What you see here," the billionaire continued, "is not a set of secrets to punish you. It's a mirror. A mirror so that everyone can look at themselves honestly and understand that true greatness lies not in money or status, but in humility, respect, and dignity." Clara, still seated with her calm smile, surveyed the room. Her presence, her serenity, and her humility amplified the impact of the revelations. The guests then realized that their past behavior had been exposed in the most elegant yet unflinching manner. A businesswoman, her voice trembling, murmured, "I never thought that we could be so blind to our own arrogance." The billionaire concluded, "This dinner is not a punishment. It is a reminder: money and power are nothing without respect, consideration, and humanity. Clara has shown us that even those we believe to be modest or insignificant can possess the greatest wisdom." The initial murmur of mockery had turned into respectful silence, then into genuine applause. The lesson was clear: true influence comes from the heart and character, not from social status or wealth. This final revelation left an indelible mark on the evening. The guests would never forget Clara's gaze, voice, and dignity. The guests gradually left the table, but the atmosphere in the room remained electric. Everyone seemed lost in thought, reflecting on what they had just experienced. The laughter and mocking whispers of the early evening had vanished, replaced by a profound sense of respect and introspection. Several guests approached Clara to speak to her directly. A young CEO, visibly moved, spoke up. "Clara, I want to thank you. You opened my eyes to my own behavior. I had never realized the effect my words could have on my teams. Clara smiled humbly. Recognizing our mistakes is already the beginning of change. It is by listening and acting with respect that we truly become powerful. An investor, who had been arrogant all evening, nodded his head and whispered to his neighbor. I think I'm going to review the whole way I run my business, and how I treat my employees. Even the most skeptical guests seemed transformed. Some spoke in hushed tones about taking initiatives to encourage and value their colleagues, aware that they had long ignored the importance of small gestures and respect. The billionaire, observing the scene, approached Clara and murmured with a satisfied smile. You managed to do what I wanted, without even realizing it. Clara replied gently. I simply spoke with honesty and humility. But I'm glad it had an impact. This evening, which had begun as a simple social dinner, gradually transformed into a true catalyst for change for all those present. The lessons in respect, consideration, and humility they had received from Clara promised to have repercussions far beyond this luxurious mansion, in their businesses, their families, and their daily lives. The transformation wasn't instantaneous for everyone, but a seed of awareness had been planted. And for Clara, modesty and dignity remained her greatest assets, capable of changing even the most closed hearts. The evening was drawing to a close. The guests, still shaken by Clara's revelations and lessons, rose to take their leave. But the manner was no longer the same for them. Arrogance, hasty judgments, and mocking laughter had given way to reflection, humility, and profound respect. The billionaire approached Clara and whispered to her. You changed this evening, and perhaps even more. Clara, humbly, simply replied. I simply spoke honestly and thoughtfully. But I'm glad it made everyone think. Before leaving, the guests exchanged unexpected glances. Some whispered amongst themselves, sharing their thoughts. I never would have believed that a chambermaid could make us feel so much. It makes me rethink my way of leading, speaking, and judging. Even the most skeptical seemed affected. The lesson of the evening was clear: true greatness lies not in wealth or power, but in integrity, respect, and the ability to value others. Clara returned to her duties with the same modesty, but her role that evening remained etched in everyone's memory. This dinner, which could have been just another social gathering, had become a historic moment for all those present. The voice of a humble and wise woman had left an indelible mark, reminding everyone that true influence is not measured by money, but by character. As night fell on the glittering mansion, the guests left the house transformed. And somewhere, in the majestic silence of the hall, Clara smiled, aware that the power of respect and dignity had just triumphed over arrogance and judgment. This evening would forever be remembered as a life lesson that no amount of money could buy.